creativity is just decision making,
Yeah.
right? It's like a series of decisions that you make that lead you from one place to another.
I'd like to welcome to the show, Lori Mazor. Thank you so much for being here today, Lori. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for having me, Dr. Laura.
You can call me Laura, but thank you. One of the things I just want to share with the audience that energetically drew me to you and was part of the reason why I wanted to have you on the show is, look, you're in the artificial intelligence realm. That's all big news right now. Or more importantly, I should say, I love the whole human component of what you're doing with AI. And there's something about that fun, creative interplay that really I was drawn to you, and I wanted to have you on the show. So I would love for you to share with the audience a little bit about who you are, what you do, what you're passionate about.
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Lori Mazor, and I teach AI with a human touch. That is literally the slogan that I came up with for my headline on LinkedIn.
Love it.
And it was one of those things that just came to me and it captured everything, right? And I think, what I really try and do is to help people, many of whom are over 50 or in the latter part of their career, have hands-on experience learning how to use AI tools. And I don't do strategy, I don't do consulting. I am a teacher, and I really want to empower people to have all of the exposure so that then when they are in those strategy conversations and in those business conversations or in those conversations with their neighbors, right, they can really speak from experience.
Love it. Love it. So share a little bit about your journey, because this is kind of
Yeah.
a new area. I'd love for the audience to hear a little bit more about how did you end up in this area?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I like to say that I accidentally tripped into AI. This was not on the career plan at any point in my life. And I actually don't think very many people, even those who studied computer science and had careers in AI, could have imagined that this
Right.
would be the moment. I was trained as an architect. And for me, that was a way of reconciling these two forces within myself that have been there since I was a little kid. One being this kind of playful, creative, whether it was in the theater or making art, but really using that kind of uh, imaginative part of my brain.
Mm-hmm.
And the other part, which was someone who really likes structure and rules, um, math and logic. And I found that when it was time to pick a career, and as my father said, one that would pay health insurance, that architecture
Right.
was the path that treaded right in between. But I've now done a lot of different things, and a career in architecture actually led me to university administration, where I
Oh,
oversaw.
wow.
Yeah, so I used to call myself the vice president of everything that breaks. I had facilities management. I had, during the pandemic, environmental health and safety, which was making sure that
Wow.
through COVID. And I had our IT team that was doing incredible work, moving everybody from in-person classes to online classes and then back into some hybrid environment. So I think that, I've been kind of jack of all trades, master of none for a very long time. And I think for me, what was so exciting about AI and generative AI in particular is that it gave me a chance to really explore the vast, wide range of my skills and abilities. You don't have to be an expert in anything, and you
Hmm.
can really learn and teach yourself a lot of new skills. And so I'm having fun with everything from making images and music and videos to teaching myself how to code, to teaching other people how to code, to doing business analytics and building applications. And, it's just been honestly a field day. So I would like to share that joy that I'm finding with this with other people.
I love that, and the joy comes through for sure as you're talking about it. It definitely does, and it's almost what I feel as you're speaking is it's discovery after discovery after discovery, right? Like that's what it feels like. And I think that's the on the exciting side of AI, there is that, right? And it's constant, it's changing so rapidly. It's like, ooh, you know,
Yeah.
and I follow your newsletter on LinkedIn, and I would recommend anyone in the audience to do the same. It's really fun because you're exploring. I think of myself as being someone who I like to know what's going on. I like to understand how to use it. And then I look for, specifically to AI, I'm looking for how can it supplement what I'm doing, right? And so I like to keep up on what's happening, but I'm not the person who's in there, you know, oh, this is coming out next week, or this is, it's going to have this capability. And I know sometimes when I am around people who have a greater knowledge base, I'm like, oh, wow, you mean like by the end of the year, it might be talking to me just like it's kind of a person? That's a little weird. But
Absolutely.
but I hear that, Joy. So what would you say, um, would you say in the last year has been one of the most fun discoveries for you personally?
Yeah. So I mean, I'm really loving AI generated music right now. And I love it both because it's given me the ability to take a personal project from a place where I kind of got stuck. And stuck because in order to move on to the next phase of writing a song, I would have needed to hire musicians and get into a
Mm,
studio and do a demo. And those things like just were not possible. And so it's given me a way of kind of imagining a song that I had, scored and written in my
wow.
mind, but now can produce literally from my desktop. It
Wow.
also gives me a lot of joy because sharing those kinds of things with, my network is mostly business people, right? And people who
Hmm.
are trying to understand how they can apply these tools to make their work easier and more productive, but also to
Right.
remind people that these are also tools to just have fun. And I
That's a good
literally,
thing to remember.
yeah, I mean, I literally, I turned my boot camp that I do during the
Mhm.
academic year, into a summer camp, and
Oh, I
basically,
saw that recently. That was that was fun.
it's the same set of skills I'm teaching, but I just figured let's like lighten it up for the summer. And I never would have imagined that like there's someone who's a lawyer in my class who literally said that she has not a creative bone in her body, that her mother told her when she was a young
Mm.
child that she had a terrible voice and that she should never sing. And so she's like never explored music. And by the end of a 2-hour class, had written the most incredible
Oh,
country music song about Vermont, right? With
that's
like
so
with
beautiful.
images and yeah, and it is beautiful. And these are not just, play isn't just something for fun, right? And
Right,
this
right.
from the work that
Yeah,
you do, like it allows us to access parts of our brain that we really
right,
would benefit from using in business,
right,
right?
right. Yeah,
So
tapping into more of it. And it's so weird that story is so common, right? About whether it's music. I just had a client just last week say, "Oh, I don't sing, but I'm
yeah.
having this weird thing that I feel like I'm supposed to learn to sing, right?" And I said, "Well, what's the story about you can't sing?" And oh, I don't remember if it was a parent or a teacher. It's one of it's someone when you're little who says, "What are you doing? Stop that. You're not good at that." Whatever the version is, and you just shut down. In a lot of different ways, we shut down when we're little kids. I certainly remember that with art. I was
Yeah.
told I was not an artist, and so I figured the only way I could do art was to do the kind where it's kind of like numbered out, so you're just like copying exactly what it's telling you to do, which is so boring. I mean, there's the structure there, Lori, but
Yes, yes,
there's
yes.
not the creativity. And it took unlearning to realize I'm actually super creative and it shows up in different ways. So I love that you're tapping into that with AI, this idea of, because a lot of people are scared of it, right? Let me ask you this. So if someone is listening and they're actually really nervous about artificial intelligence, what would you want to say to them?
Yeah, this is so interesting. I've actually started writing a post yesterday about this, which kind of turned into a poem. So I am still working on it. But said, every time I post a newsletter, every time I step onto a stage to speak, every time I am about to teach a class, I feel nervous, right?
Mm.
That feeling of
Mhm.
nervousness to me is not, it's not fear, right? That's
Right,
different. I'm not
right,
afraid,
right,
right? I
right,
don't have anxiety. Like those are
right,
different emotions, right? Nervousness is this place where you've just crossed the line from comfortable to uncomfortable, right?
right,
That's always, to me, that's the sweet spot. That's
right.
where I always want to be. And so I approach technology the same way, right? I like, this
Mhm.
is not putting myself in a position where I feel outside my comfort zone, right? Like
Mhm.
I don't, that's never a advice I give to anybody. We don't do
Right.
things outside our comfort zone, right? We do things right at the boundary of our comfort zone, right?
Mhm.
And we keep
Mhm.
pushing that little bit, and it keeps getting
Mhm.
bigger and bigger. So, I would say, yes, be at a place where you are nervous. Nervous is good. Nervous means you're pushing the boundaries a little bit. It means you're pushing yourself to do things that are a little bit different than what you might have done before. And there are plenty of things about AI that are complicated, right? So
Right.
I teach people that, like, we are not using a tool that's just agnostic, right? It didn't just come out of nowhere, right? It has a history. That history is, there are people who have different opinions about whether the use
Mhm.
of training data from the internet is ethical or not, right? And you
Mhm.
don't have to get comfortable with all those things in order to experiment,
Mhm.
right?
No,
And then
that's great advice. Yeah.
yeah, then you can make a decision whether or not this is a tool that its benefits outweigh its costs, right? And I think this is
Right.
one of the big questions we're all going to have to ask ourselves, right? At a certain
Yeah.
point, is there, where do we weigh this? And is it worth the energy that we're expending, right? Is it worth the release of copyright, right? Are there things that we would be willing to give up collectively in order to reap some sort of benefit for everyone? Or is there some kind of exploitation there that we want to make sure that we course correct, right? These are all, I think, the good questions to be asking as you're actually getting hands-on experience, learning how to use it, right? And then you
Mhm.
can speak in a more informed way because you can see it, right? You've
Right.
used it,
Right.
how it might be biased, or you see how you might have like spent money right on your bill that month, right? So
And I think really, I love that where it's, think about it as experimenting, right? Exploring, discovering, experimenting, and see. I think it's a great analogy for a lot of things in life, right? See what works for you. See where you're feeling uncomfortable. See where you think, oh, there's opportunity here. See where you think, ooh, maybe this should be different, right? I think there's an invitation right now, not just because of AI, but I think where our world is right now to start looking inward to ourselves instead of relying external to tell us what's good, what's right, how to do something, and to think of whether it's taking a course with you or whether it's reading your book or someone else's book or just exploring, take in and check and see, does this, how does this feel? But if you don't even go out there and try it, it's kind of hard to have an informed conversation or even
absolutely.
comment.
Yeah, I mean, then you're really relying on other people's opinions, and then you have to be, careful about who do you trust, who are you listening to, right? What voices are you hearing? And so, yeah, I always like that kind of, yeah, I don't know. There's like show me, right? I think there's one of the states in the US that's like the show me state.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
I like somebody who will show me, right?
Right.
Give it to me, let me see it, let me try it myself, let me get, a first person accounting of
Hmm.
something. And my first person accounting won't be the same as yours, but then we
Right.
can have a conversation, right?
Right. Right.
This is what I did, this is what you did. What does that mean?
So what, you wrote a book,
Yeah.
Temperature, and what prompted that? I mean, you got that out pretty quick from the time that you started playing, right? Am I right? Like
Yes,
you were on
yes,
it.
and no. Yes and no. I mean, it's
Okay.
like one of those like it's very interesting. There was a photo that was taken during the Olympics recently of a surfer, male surfer who had like gone through the barrel of the wave. It looked like he was basically had disappeared and maybe had gone under. And then all of a sudden he popped up and a photographer caught that in motion, right? And everyone's like, this is amazing. Like photography is capturing real life, not AI. And I'm like, you know what? Wait a minute there. He writes about how he got that photo. So number one, when he got that photo, he took 4 photos, right? And while he was taking that photo, he had anticipated that this moment was going to happen.
Right.
So he was sitting in the right place at the
Waiting.
right time, waiting, right? And
Right.
that's my book, right? I was sitting in the right place at the right time, waiting for this moment. I didn't know it was going to happen right now, but I had written a thesis in graduate school on creativity and rules. And at the
Oh.
time, I knew I wanted to write a book, but I couldn't tie the story together. I didn't
Hmm.
know what it meant. I knew I
Right.
had a theory, um, and I knew that I could probably support it with data, but I couldn't figure out how to tell it and who to tell it to, frankly.
Right. Right.
And so, I went about my business and really, and then I knew I wanted to write a book. So, I did what you do when you want to write a book. I started to write a book and I wrote
Right.
2 other books on 2 other topics
Oh,
before I
wasn't the
ever
right time.
one. It wasn't the right time,
Yeah.
but I was like practicing, right? I
Hmm.
was like
Hmm.
practicing getting ready for the moment. So when the moment happened, it really was a light bulb. And I realized on a speaking engagement talking about the topic of the former book that that was not the message I wanted to give at this moment in time. And at that
Mm-hmm.
point in time, I'd been using AI long enough and then I started to put all the pieces together. So what I really had been writing about 10 years ago is a metric that is, or a parameter that's called temperature in AI models. And it literally is a dial that lets us dial up or down the amount of randomness that we sample using natural language in order to produce an output.
Mm-hmm.
And for people who are using something like ChatGPT, you probably won't even see it. But when you use image generators, it's actually something that you can toggle, you can slide back
Oh,
and forth.
really? Yeah,
It's
tangibly
different.
toggle it. Okay.
Yes, and so you can see the difference in what happens when you turn it up or you can turn it down. Sometimes it's called chaos, sometimes it's called
Huh.
um, variety. But
Interesting.
and it's honestly, we all need this in our life. If you think about like, how do you curate your social media feed, right?
Right.
Are you dialing it all the way down so you're getting
Right.
things that are the most popular and the most
Right.
comfortable, or are you dialing it up and getting the things that are the most random,
Mm-hmm.
the
Mm-hmm.
most different? And I think we all could use a good dose of chaos in our life in a
Interesting.
constructive way, right?
I love
So
that. And I
yeah.
had never, when I read it, I had never heard that concept of temperature in artificial intelligence. I didn't know anything about it. But as you're speaking about it right now, what popped into my head was one of the things that I find for me really jumpstarts my creativity and really allows me to shift perspectives, which I love. Like I know not everyone loves that. I love it. But for me, is travel and
Yeah.
travel to places I haven't been, to places where I may not necessarily speak the language, food that I may not know, a new culture, a new way of being, and I get so excited. But I don't try to plan it ahead of time. Right. Like
Yeah.
so I'm not trying to control, I guess what I'm just thinking of what you just said. I'm not turning that dial to, let's just say I'm not going to the places that are exactly the same no matter what country you go to.
Yes.
Like I really want to go and experience different, different people, different cultural, different languages, food.
Yeah.
So I leave space for that. And I think
Yeah.
that's what you're speaking to, is leaving space for that, what you can't necessarily even think of to plan. And if you plan, if you structure it too much, I don't know about other people, but I think it's a little bit boring. you
It
know?
is boring. It is boring.
So
And then
so
it
that's
starts
really
to,
interesting. And so
yeah.
what happens with, I would say most of the audience probably is most comfortable with something like ChatGPT or maybe Gemini or Claude. So that doesn't show up on those in the same way that
Yeah.
it does in
So
the.
It doesn't show up. The best example of a large language model that allows you in a public for the general
Right.
public that allows you to see temperature is what used to be called Bing and is now Microsoft Copilot.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So when you open that up, there on the screen will be a bar that says creative, precise, and balanced.
Okay.
And
All right.
that literally is temperature. And GPT-4, we think, everything we can know, and there's a lot that is kind of in the black box of a startup. But what we do know is that it's likely operating mostly in what they call creative mode at a high temperature,
Okay.
which is why you will often get something that people call hallucination.
Right.
Because that space, that what we call latent space,
Mhm.
right? There's more of it to be filled with what is being discovered as it goes on, as you
Right.
find the data to answer your question. And there is no there is no truth toggle, right? So to
Right, right.
pile up or down truth. But the more randomness you allow in, the more likely, that might not be something that aligns with what we understand as truth.
Okay. And what are your thoughts as far as the opportunities and maybe the concerns? But it sounds like you have a passion for education, just in general. So I'd love to hear what you think are opportunities and then maybe also just cautions for younger children training and learning and exploring with artificial intelligence.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's very interesting. I have a 16-year-old daughter, and honestly, she's not interested, and I love that. She's not that she's not digital. She's had a phone since the age of 10. She engages in all the social media apps that all of the kids do. But she also really, and I think a lot of this came out of the pandemic, and I think it's something that not everybody really appreciates about what's happened to these kids, but
Right.
their whole life was online. And so they don't necessarily glamorize being online. They love
Mm-hmm.
being in person, right? She was like
Mm-hmm.
so excited to just be back in person playing volleyball with
Right.
friends, right? Like living real life. And she loves physical books, right?
Wow.
Yeah, she likes experiences and loves like live music concerts, right? So, I would say, it's to each their own. There will be some kids who are really into it, and there will be some who, like my daughter, not so much. So I wouldn't say we have to like force this upon them.
That's
They will
right.
discover it as they need it. I think making sure in general the kids understand, and I think this is like goes way back, before artificial intelligence, to just understanding that there is no truth out there in the media, right? That you actually have to do some research and you have to
Right.
know your source, know who's writing
Mhm.
the article, know what their particular biases are, right? So, I mean, I think media training in general for young people as well as those of us who are older is important. But I have taught high school, and I have found that actually they're more savvy about this stuff than
Mhm.
people who are my age
That
are.
makes sense.
Right?
I was curious and it makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah,
Do they see
they
it? Do you think it's because it's more like a just another playful, I don't mean by like exploratory opportunity. So it doesn't seem like it seems like as we get older, there's more of a feeling like, what's that? What's that going to do? Right? There's almost like that caution. Is it more that they're just open to something different and being curious, or what would you say?
I think that a lot of it is that they don't have the expectation that what they are seeing is truth,
Oh, that's interesting.
right?
Yes.
We grew up
So
thinking
they're
that what
not so serious about it. They're not so, whereas we have that
they're just
expectation.
more skeptical. Yeah, they're more skeptical, and they've learned that they can't trust what they see on social media,
Yeah,
right?
such a great
So
point.
yeah, and I think those of us, and I grew up in the 80s where we like watched the news and we expected that the news that was being delivered to
Right,
us was the truth,
right,
right?
right.
We know now that it isn't, but that I think is, I think that's a bias that our generation has had to
Yeah,
overcome.
super interesting. Because I know a couple times when someone has shown me something that is AI produced, I think my doctoral training goes in and I'm like, where's the resource?
That's right.
And
That's
is
right.
this a real resource or is this just one that sounds good? Where's the link to the resource? You know, I mean, that's like when I wrote my dissertation, it was like every single resource. I mean, people would check every single
Yes.
resource and you couldn't write anything unless it was your thought, which is the only time you were allowed to. But if you were saying anything that was supposed to be like what was up until that point, you had to cite it. You had to have, and back then, you know, I was actually doing it on a total old school computer, meaning the printer
Yep.
was shaking as it was going out and it wasn't that easy to change. So you had to have every single thing just so there was something in me the first time or many times that someone showing, hey, look at this. And I'm like, I don't know. Have you checked
Yeah.
those resources? I'm not buying it.
Absolutely.
But I see what you're
My,
saying, you know?
yeah, my book is not a dissertation, so I did not, go in and inline cite do inline citations, but I did notes, and
Yeah.
my notes in the back are actually my proudest chapter.
Hmm. Why? So
I
why?
yeah, I've always enjoyed if I've read an author's work, I then get really curious about what
Hmm.
they're reading, right? And
Yeah.
so I always like flip to the end notes and like follow what they're reading, and often will kind of pick my next read based on somebody else's end notes. So I
Mm.
spent a lot of time making sure those end notes were actually enjoyable. And and some of them even have like some stories that I didn't feel like were worthy of like
In the book.
sharing in the main
Yeah.
body of the text, but some Easter eggs for the curious.
Oh, I
So
love that. I love that. So what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts about the evolution of creativity for humans? Right. And just a small question, but where are we going and what do you think is possible?
yeah, so I think that I am not intimidated by the fact that machines can simulate many of the processes that we've
Hmm.
come to associate with creativity,
Okay.
right? So, and I think within my book, like part of what I've been trying to do is demystify creativity so that
Yeah.
it's not a genius activity and it's not even a talent, frankly,
Hmm.
right? And it's not just one group of people who are particularly good at doing this,
Wait,
right?
can I stop you for a second because there might be someone wondering, what do you mean it's not really a talent?
Yeah. So I can teach you how to be creative, right? And I can teach you how to do it from many different starting points. So,
Okay.
you know, the myths that are out there, and I talk a lot about these in the book because one of the things I wanted to do was really dig into the creativity science and see, what is this all about?
Right.
And this is a field that many scholars, PhD level scholars, have studied. So, what I garner from that research is that, number one, we do not have two sides of our brain where creativity happens on one side and other things happen on the other side, right? You know this. We have different loci in our brain that, yes, do perform specific functions. I witnessed this when my father had a stroke and
Mm,
was able to walk but couldn't speak, right? So
right. Yeah.
that we know is true. But what's not true is that creativity happens on one side of the brain, right? And there
Yeah, no,
was
we
a
definitely think of, and I'm just reflecting on a conversation I recently had in kind of left brain, right brain, right? I think it's a convenient way to talk about something, it not necessarily encompass all that is, but sometimes it's that people have it's an easy understanding to think, okay, left brain, language, logic, linear, rational, right brain, more intangible, it's less linear, it tends to be more creative. I think some people do use that word, but it tends to be more visual rather than language based. There are some things that are pretty like just people just kind of know that, but in the end, if you have a functioning corpus callosum, it's communicating the whole time, and it isn't just one place for it.
right.
I
And I
definitely
think
agree with
there
that.
were like three myths I tried to demystify. I'll see if I can remember all of them. But like one of them is that creativity and artistic talent are not the same. right? So
Mm-hmm.
have directed
Yeah.
people who we have seen have an aptitude for creative thinking into artistic endeavors when really you need just as much creativity to work within a spreadsheet, to do
Right.
financial
Right.
planning, right? To invent
I think
new,
that's something that's definitely not
right?
talked about is the creativity that's not necessarily associated with an art, some form of an artist. It's like there's so much creativity that's actually needed right now because our world is changing so fast. So whether it's a strategy plan at an organization, you got to bring in some creativity there.
Yeah, and I just talk about it as like it's creativity is just decision making,
Yeah.
right? It's like a series of decisions that you make that lead you from one place to another. I think the other thing is, the Torrance test for creative thinking is a test that was developed in the 1950s, right? So if we put ourselves in the mentality of the 1950s, right?
Mhm.
And it tests for our ability to generate novelty, right? So
Hmm.
to
Okay.
see an outcome that is different than what the majority of other people would see, right? And
Mm-hmm.
novelty is not necessarily creativity.
Hmm.
And in fact, one of the leading computational scientists, Stephen Wolfram, talks about the fact that novelty is actually quite easy
Yeah.
in machines,
That's
right? You can
interesting.
generate
Yeah.
random numbers, right?
Right. Right.
But what makes that artistic or artistry or creativity is the way we connect that with meaning,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that when I saw him say this at MIT, and I was like, oh my God, I'm like, I've got to capture that. Like that is it, right? And
Yeah.
so I look more for what do we care about, right? What am I
Mm-hmm.
going to say to you that's going to
Yeah.
light you up? What am I going to say to you that's going to make you curious? What can I
Yeah.
say that's going to make you sad or
Right.
that's going to, influence your thinking in one way or the other? What are the meaningful conversations we can have? And that's when, and you can see it in what kinds of products people buy, right?
Right.
So like
Right.
innovation isn't just doing the weirdest thing, it's doing the thing that's
Right.
different enough that it catches people's attention and that it does something meaningful for
Right.
them.
Like there's a connection to something that matters, right? And that it's not just a random, like you said, new thing, a random different thing. It's that's not, I love that so much because when I think about AI, it's so easy to create something. It's so much easier. Maybe it was easy for us before, but it's even easier now to create something different. We can do it so fast, right? But therefore, what? I know
It,
for me, when I've gone in and tried just to stretch a little bit what I play with on artificial intelligence, I might put something out there, I get something back, and I'm like, huh, okay. Like that's
yeah,
kind of a cool choice of random words that you put together for a possible title for this.
yeah,
But what I love about it is it well, what I guess to the point of meaning, it might not really connect to what like the heart of what I'm doing. So I discount it, right? So it's new, it's novel, I'm kind of curious. But then the second piece is it might it might actually instill an inspiration in me for something that I hadn't seen previously, right?
yeah.
So,
And,
but that is meaningful, that is connected, so I love that the
uh,
difference what creativity really is.
and what's meaningful to me and what's meaningful you
Hmm.
will be different. And what I love about it is actually it creates this infinite capacity for personalization, right?
Yeah.
So like, I can write songs about my life and about my family and that are about the issues that are important to me, right? In like less than 5 minutes, right?
Right.
You can make an entire album like in an hour, right?
Amazing.
That's
Yeah.
personal to my story. And I think that what's interesting to me is that the people that we kind of put on a pedestal or that are celebrities or those are people who have connected with meaning that is beyond your own
Yes.
person, beyond your own community, right? I mean, like, look at Bob Marley, right?
Yeah.
He tapped into an emotion that's
Mm,
global,
yeah.
right? we listen to his music and we all resonate with it, whether or not we grew up
Right,
in Jamaica or,
right,
you know,
right.
in
Yeah,
like Romania, right? I think
yeah.
those are the things that are powerful and that last like intergenerationally, right? I mean,
Mhm.
Shakespeare, the guy understood the human condition,
Yeah,
right? We
right,
keep coming back to those works over and over
right.
and over again, reinventing them, revisiting them based on what's changed culturally, right? But the
Wow.
fact that, we have tragedies and
Yeah.
heroes, right?
The human experience, the human
Yeah,
journey, right?
not things haven't changed that much.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I think like to be able to be someone who can operate at that level, right? Like
Mhm.
that's, to
Mhm.
me, that's genius.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
being able to come up with something weird, that's not so hard.
You know what? In a way, I think this can be something really positive for anyone listening who never thought that they were creative, who never thought that they could, that they were artistic. It's like, hey, you know what? It's different. So look for the connection to what's meaningful to you. Don't just try to create for creating sake, right? Or don't just try to pump out something new, because if it's not, if it just because it's new doesn't necessarily mean it's going to resonate.
That's right. That's
Yeah,
right.
I love
And
that.
honestly, a lot of it too is having the courage to what we often say, ship it, right? To put it out into the market, to put it out into the world, even those things where, might not be the best thing you've ever done, right? And,
Right.
I think that's a lot of what we talk about with, there are more failures than successes
Right.
in most what I do. Some times I put stuff up and it really like just doesn't people don't connect with it. And sometimes I put stuff up and people are like, wow, that's like the most amazing ever. Right. And you would never know actually
Right.
which of those two things is gonna happen, right? Sometimes like
Right.
the things I don't spend time on, the things that like most random thoughts tend to pop.
So true. Yeah, and I just saw someone had posted the other day just talking about that from the standpoint of also not necessarily looking for the external validation of it, that really checking in with you and shifting, whether it's a social media post, whether it's whatever you're putting, a newsletter, whatever you're putting out into the world that is your putting it out, is checking in with you. Does this feel good? Is this me? Is this aligned with what really matters to me? Right. I mean,
Yeah,
like with this podcast, there's tons and tons of people that I could interview. And I want to interview people where there's like, I am curious. There's some energetic connection. There's some meaning around it for me, because otherwise I would just be talking like this and it would just be a super boring, like no one wants
yeah,
that. I need to be engaged in it. If I'm not
yeah,
engaged in it, why would my audience be engaged in it?
yeah, absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So as you think forward, I love this because you're in an area that is so rapidly changing. Now, I think a lot of areas are rapidly changing. This is just I think this is more visible. I think a lot of industries are changing. I think a lot of organizations are changing. People are changing. I mean, a lot of my clients tend to be like, I did this up until now, and I want to do something totally different. I love that. But with artificial intelligence and really the area that you're in, it's so rapidly changing. People know that. I would love to hear what's next for you on this journey. I mean, obviously you're not going to know 10 years from now because it's going to change so much, but what's next for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think some of what is coming now, and which is actually I'm quite grateful for this, is that there is some stability that is coming to the state of the tools, the products, like the applications that we have available to us. And because there's some parallel nature to how these generative systems work.
Mhm.
We can see that, language models are the most advanced.
Mhm.
Image generators are also pretty advanced. We can see the direction that those have taken over the past 2 years. And as we are then seeing other medium come into the fold, particularly video and music, which right now are the ones that are really
Wow.
moving quickly, we kind of know what trajectory they are going to,
Okay.
right? And what might be possible. And so to me, that's very, very interesting. And so it gives me kind of two layers to operate at, right? One
Okay.
is that I'm in my, I think now 17th cohort of teaching my
Wow.
generative AI boot camp, which I now have rebranded as a summer camp. And frankly, the summer camp went so successfully that I'm going to rinse and repeat it for the fall.
Okay.
Um, because I started out doing a monthly program where
Hmm.
it was like an intro class.
Hmm.
And now people are getting more experienced.
Right.
So I now do an 8-week program where you enroll in the whole thing, or you can just pop in and take a la carte the classes
Mm.
that
Oh,
are interesting
cool.
to you or that pick up at your level.
Right.
And so I think that gives me the chance to kind of like spend a whole, 3 months or so,
Right. Really
really
go
like,
deeper, really go more. Oh, that's cool. Yeah.
yeah, and like literally take people through a single project. So the classes, other than the first class, which is kind of a 101, the classes are all hands-on project based. So everybody walks out of the class having learned 1, 2, 3 tools, having experimented with them in class, having gone through a workflow and
Hmm.
having an end product at the end, which then they can either like keep working on and refining on their own, or they can like do it again. So the last class we did music videos. The class
Wow.
before that, we built a chatbot within ChatGPT that allows us
Mhm.
to have a conversation with a board of advisors, which is
Right.
like one of my favorite exercises to teach. And so now we kind of made it so that you could always go to this GPT
Right.
and it will take you through the logical steps. Um, I'm doing a coding class in the next class, and then we actually build a more complex GPT that connects with your Google Calendar. So,
Wow.
I think it's just, I try and kind of feel out, first of all, what are other people not teaching, right?
Right.
Like
Right.
there's plenty of stuff out there. And so I want to make sure that my offerings are unique and really like targeted towards the people who are going to be attracted to me as a
Right.
teacher. And so, yeah, that's one. So just kind of like stable, refining, getting better at teaching, and reaching what people are looking for. The second thing is, we are now getting to the point where some of the enterprise level applications are getting better. I have been very hesitant to get into scaling these for corporations. I know a lot of people are doing that. That's great, but I have not found them to be reliable enough for
Mm.
institutions that need some level of like predictability,
Right.
truth, right? All of that.
Right.
But we are getting there, and the
Yes.
techniques for being able to do that are getting
Mm.
better. So I'm dipping my toe in there.
Right.
I think that like experimentation is now all for me. I'm writing a musical, and so I'm now using the
It's
music
amazing.
generators as a way to get from my stuck point to some kind of a demo track. I would be able to share, and that's really fun and exciting. And I'm also kind of figuring out like where are the gaps and
Right.
what's needed in the space. So yeah.
You did mention earlier something about theater. So is this music? So that there's a connection there. There's meaning there for you, right?
Oh my
I
gosh,
love that.
absolutely. I mean, I grew up as a theater kid. I from the age of 3, I was performing on stages.
Oh,
Yeah, I started tap dancing at a really young age. I was also asthmatic, and so my parents put me in like all kinds of activities that I could do and like push my lungs a little bit. So like
right.
singing and dancing were like I didn't need to, run a mile.
Right. Right.
There was like short sprints and then I could take my inhaler. And so yeah, I grew up in the theater, and I really was in the theater until I was like 26, and then
Oh.
kind of made the transition to, as my father says, a career with health insurance. Um, so
Oh.
yeah, theater has always been a passion, but also I think something that I feel has business value to it, and
Mhm.
connects with the way that AI models work. So, this exercise that I do with creating a personal board of advisors, that taps into a concept which we call personas in large language models. And it's one of the great things you can do with it, and it's this like fine line between not anthropomorphizing it, right?
Right.
Which from a psychological perspective is not a little frightening. But tapping into its understanding about statistically what it means to speak a human language, right?
Right.
And
Right.
so you can, another way other than like dialing up and down temperature is to give it a persona, which then it helps it to tap into specialized knowledge that that
Right.
persona would be an expert in.
Yeah.
And so, we invite three personas to come and give us feedback on a problem that we have, right? One
Wow.
might be a financial advisor, one
Right.
might be a marketing expert, one
Right.
might be your mother, right? You can
Right.
like whoever you want. And I have found, and I think one of the latter chapters in the book talks a little bit about this, that personas are a way of us also being able to build empathy,
Mm.
right? Being able to step into somebody else's shoes
Mhm.
and being able to play a role within your company that is not necessarily the role that was assigned to you.
Right.
Um, I find, I got all kinds of advice growing up in business about how I was supposed to stay in my lane, um, represent my my role's interests, right? So if I'm the
Right.
architect, I'm supposed to defend design. And I found that all that did was just create friction, unnecessary
Mhm.
friction. But
Interesting.
if I was able to kind of persuade the other people within my business that that had value to them, then I
Mhm.
also had the freedom to take on their causes too. And it
Right.
wasn't really until that I saw that starting to happen that I was like, like this is how good business happens. Business doesn't happen by you like defending your turf.
Right.
Good business
Right.
happens by understanding somebody else's turf and
Yeah.
owning it,
Ooh, well,
right?
that's a big potential amazing shift opportunity in many organizations. I love that. So if someone's listening and they want to know about your book or know about your courses, how do they get in touch with you? How do they
Yeah.
find out more?
Absolutely. So you can always find me on LinkedIn. I'm Lori Mazor, and if you do a Google search, I'm right there. And you can also find me on my website, Synthetivity. It's a bit of a tongue twister, but it's the portmanteau of synthesis and creativity. And I post all of my classes there. My book is there, and the book's also on Amazon.
Wonderful. And I'd love to ask you if you have any last words that you'd like to share with the audience and about anything.
Oh, I think that in this moment, it's just like really important to be open, right? To be open and receptive. And um, there's a lot, as we talked about in the beginning, there is a lot to be afraid of, and you don't have to let fear stand in your way,
Mhm.
right? You can just try
Mm,
and then see how it feels.
I love that. Well, thank you so much, Lori, for joining us today. I really appreciate you being here, sharing obviously your joy about artificial intelligence and meaning and creativity. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.